Hey, welcome to Rainier View. We're glad that you're joining us, and we're continuing in our series today on Recalibrate. If you're catching this live, we are kicking off a brand new year, looking at some of the practices, the spiritual habits or rhythms that we can embrace in the year ahead to really not blow up our whole life, but to pay attention to some of the smaller, more subtle shifts we can make to end up recalibrating where our lives are taking us, where we're going, to intentionally end up in the spaces and places that God wants for us. And so today we want to talk about how to recalibrate your compassion. So this past summer, I went to something called Summer Worship Nights, and it had Brandon Lake and Phil Wickham. And now I am not a big worship concert goer. It's just I like concerts, I like worship on Sunday. I don't like mixing the two together. But I decided, no, these are two artists I really enjoy, and man, it was really great. I was so glad I went. They were so authentic, so heartfelt. It was really a refreshing moment. Now, at some point in the concert, though, Phil Wickham is a pretty energetic guy. He's bouncing around, and at some point his shoe becomes untied. And so there's there's kind of like a raised stage, and it's elevated, and it's like in the shape of a cross, and then there's, I don't know what you call it, but the moat, the space around it below. And so he says at some point, just jokingly, man, somebody really needs to come tie my shoe or something. Kid you not, this kid with the big camera pack on his shoulder, right? He runs over, sets it down, and he starts tying Phil Wickham's shoe from the moat, up there. And Phil, you could tell, is so uncomfortable. He doesn't know what to do. He wants to, oh my gosh, this is so weird. I didn't want this to happen. But then what he does next, I thought was so indicative of, man, what can happen when we serve out of a place of compassion. Because Phil, he just basically pulls this young kid up on this stage with him. Kid in his young 20s, he's part of the production crew, and Phil wraps his arm around him. He says, man, you guys don't know, I don't know his name, but I'm gonna call him Johnny. Man, you guys don't know Johnny. Johnny is an integral part of leading our production as we go from city to city and just create spaces for people to worship fully. Man, I just want you to know what an amazing part of the team is and who he is. And man, when I saw that, I thought, isn't that what God does in our life so often? Right? That he sees our heart to serve, that as Johnny was willing to do whatever it took to make Summer Worship Nights a success and for them to be an amazing experience for thousands and thousands of people, right? Phil elevates him at some point. He brings him up on stage with him. It wasn't something that Johnny asked for, but it's something that happens. And so really it begs the question for me is, what's our heart for serving? Why do you serve? Or maybe, why do you not serve at all? Because Johnny, to me, exemplified what having a servant heart, motivated by compassion, wanting to create an experience for somebody else, what it's all about. And so we, again, want you to figure out, what does it look like for me to engage with this spiritual rhythm, this discipline of serving others? Okay, what does that look like for me in the year ahead? Because if we want to have a changed life, if we want to take hold of a life that is marked by more compassion, then again, we're not going to end up there unintentionally wandering towards it. We're going to end up there making intentional choices to move towards it. And so for us, at least at Rainier View, it starts with checking in on your current compassion levels. How are you doing having a heart of compassion for others? Are we doing all we can? Are we playing our part to create an environment of hospitality in a relationally isolated and relationally starved world? That is what we're called to do. And it takes a community, it takes all of us to create that kind of community and space that our world so desperately needs. And so we talk about one of our core commitments here at Rainier View being that we are committed to showing up for our cities to make an unignorable difference. That's what we want to be about because, in part, that's what the early church, the first generation of Christians did. As we've been talking about, we're kind of looking at Acts chapter 2 throughout this series and looking at some of the ways that the early church behaved, what they did, and how we can take those same actions and the principles from them and work them in our own lives to take the heart of that and live it out today together. And so, because what is unchanging in the passage we're going to see is that the compassion that it's experienced within the church relationally is what drives change and service to others. Okay? And so look with me, Acts 2, beginning in verse 42. We're going to read about 5 verses together. Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Now, I bolded some of the statements in there to highlight how much community is taking place for this first generation of Christians, how much they, again, sacrificed to be with each other and for each other. And again, the way that we gather is going to look different, but that heart of compassion for one another must remain the same. And again, compassion is what fuels and motivates us to, again, pursue meeting needs beyond and outside of ourselves. And so again, compassion really is the fuel that can launch me beyond a self-centeredness in my life to a selflessness. And that's what we want to be about when we gather. We want to discover that compassion is a fuel that can move us beyond our self-centeredness and move towards a selflessness. And so for me as a pastor, this is kind of clarified really for me in the season ahead that I need to be about 2 simple words: connect and invite. Connect and invite. I want us as the people of Rainier View to be looking, how am I helping other people connect here relationally, and how am I creating easy and more opportunities for people to be invited to come in and join us. And so again, as we do these 2 simple activities with greater intentionality and greater compassion, it will determine the degree to which we experience that kind of community together. Type of community that's marked by the way that Jesus asks us to live. Because Jesus gives us the vision, the reason, the why for how we ought to live differently and why we should live differently in the first place. Because seeking more of myself really is an empty road to travel at the end of the day. If we travel it all the way down, we're going to end up disappointed. But don't wait till you get to the end of the road to begin to embrace Jesus' vision for how to live. And so we're going to look at that in Mark chapter 10. And so I encourage you to open up in your Bible, shut down those notifications, maybe throw it in airplane mode even if you're looking at it digitally through your Bible app, or get your physical Bible out, open up to Mark 10, because we're going to discover the vision that Jesus gives us of a compassion that can fuel us beyond our self-centeredness to embracing a selflessness. And so we're going to pick up in verse 35. Now, if you're maybe unfamiliar with the Bible and what a gospel is a record of the life and teachings of Jesus, and Mark is one of 4 that we have. And we're picking up in Mark's gospel right before Jesus goes to Jerusalem to be killed, to be executed by the Roman government for what he was teaching and what he was doing. But the gospels also record the wonderful news that death could not hold him and his resurrection 3 days later. And so we're picking up in the story right before that. Really, Jesus is at the end of what sometimes we refer to as his earthly ministry. And we have this moment with his disciples that needed to recalibrate around compassion, and maybe you and I need to as well today. But start with me, Mark 10, verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, 2 of his closest followers. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." They're bold at least, right? And so as I talk about these guys elsewhere, their nicknames are the Sons of Thunder, right? They're straightforward dudes. But this interaction with Jesus is so instructive of all of our human hearts, because James and John didn't just meet Jesus and just automatically do anything that he said. They've been following him for a couple years at this point, and yet at this juncture, it's about manipulating Jesus into getting what they want, what they think they really need in their lives, rather what he invites them to. Because all this time they've been following with him, they kind of have been viewing it, at least in some part in their hearts and minds, as that they've been putting in the time so that one day when Jesus kind of brings this kingdom he's been talking about, they're going to get to have their foot on the Roman necks. They're going to be the ones to be in charge and kind of fight back against the oppression that they've been experiencing at the hand of the Roman Empire that's made life terrible for them and their people. But Jesus is about to reveal that our greatest struggle isn't external to us, it's internal, it's within us. Because Jesus goes on to say this in the passage, picking up in verse 38. You don't know what you are asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. That's always how I think of them saying it. Yeah, we got it. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And we see the rest of Jesus' followers are none too happy. Look at that word, the final verse I just read there. The other followers were indignant. They weren't a little peeved. They weren't annoyed. They're indignant. Why? Because James and John are trying to beat everybody to the punch and say, we want the most power, the most privilege, the most control, the best things. And it leads to this kind of like fighting amongst the disciples. They're kind of like children fighting over who's getting the largest slice of the cake. That one's bigger. You can be, right, if you have more than one kid, you know this, right? You cut the dessert up. You can have precision slicing. Somebody's going to say, that slice is bigger, I want that one, right? And so this is kind of what the disciples are doing here. And you think about like our world, we have quote unquote haven't evolved very much since this interaction the disciples had with Jesus here. Because think about the ways that the world is often talked about, our relationships with other people, right? You know, use the phrase, well, it's really survival of the fittest, okay? You might have heard the phrase, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Some of you think it's a dog-eat-dog world, which dog-eat-dog world would be fun to live in. It's just like dogs running around all the time. But no, dog-eat-dog world. Or even just, oh man, it's brutal out here, right? And so here's the shift that Jesus invites us to make. The world's not about how much you can get for yourself. He says, no. If you're motivated by compassion, it's about how you can serve others. Verse 42. Then Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you, you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I want you to feel those words before I move on from them. What does Jesus say? For the Son of Man, referring to himself, Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life away as a ransom for many. And so if God comes to us in Jesus, somehow God becoming flesh, coming to our level, and he serves us in this way, how can our hearts not be ones of compassion, motivated to give up and sacrifice some of my time, energy, and resources in the pursuit of the benefit of others? We know that this kind of compassion would motivate us to live differently. I want you to consider a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who based his work around the civil rights movement around the teachings of Jesus. And he says it this way: life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And so we've discussed this before, but the Greek word for love that is most common, that is most often used to describe how Christians ought to interact with one another in particular, is this word agape. Agape love is a self-sacrificing love that seeks the good of others. It's a deep care and concern for the good of others, a willingness to serve and sacrifice for the good of someone else. This is the kind of love that should mark the way that we live and spend our time. And so if we're not currently seeking to serve in some way, to have a heart of compassion, maybe we, like James and John, need to recalibrate our hearts a little bit. Or maybe you need to sit with the reality that maybe you haven't encountered the love of God that's been put on display in the person and work of Jesus. Maybe you've kept that at arm's length for various reasons, but we need to recalibrate around our compassion if we're going to live differently and take hold of the kind of life that God wants for us in the year ahead. It starts with being in community and experiencing that compassion with one another, which always should lead us to ask then, as I experience compassion in community, how does that compel me to serve others? And so why don't you hear a little bit from one of our newer staff members, Jada, who leads our Parkland Student Ministry. And so I want you to hear from her just how she got started serving and the difference having a heart of compassion makes, and how as we serve, our compassion grows. So let's watch. Hey, Jada, I want to sit down and just have, more people at RVCC hear a little bit of your story and just how you came to step into the role here, serving as student ministries pastor at our Parkland campus. And so I always love hearing kind of a little bit like behind the scenes and the motivations that lead somebody to kind of engage in ministry. And so, just tell me a little bit about that journey of like, when did you start serving with students and why did you step into that?
That's a really great question. I actually was serving with babies in the nursery, and I don't want to over-spiritualize it, but I don't think you can over-spiritualize God. But I was holding a baby, and I kept thinking about students and teenagers, and I remember thinking, no, I don't want to serve with them. They're scary, they're weird, and they're super moody. You can't just change their diapers and they're going to cuddle you.
They have emotional diapers.
Yes.
Anyways.
Yeah, so many emotional diapers. That is such a good way to say that. I'm going to steal that. And after a month of like wrestling with this notion of students being put on my heart, I went to kind of like observe what students looked like at the church I was at. And it was the weirdest night because they were doing a challenge of brushing their teeth with their toes. And it was like even like the toothpaste and I was like, it's so weird, I love it. And that's like where I was like, okay, I'm all in, just from seeing like their weirdness and how much fun they were having in community.
Yeah, and I love that draw to like, hey, like there's real community happening here around like the most bizarre of things, but like even my youth ministry days, like just right. It's really a gift when you can enter into community with teenagers who are figuring out life, right? And just be part of that journey, walking alongside them. And so, so you were not scared off by toothbrushing with feet, which is great. But was there anything that was like a little bit of hesitation around serving students that was kind of like a barrier that you had to overcome really to kind of jump in?
Yeah, I felt like I was fighting the barrier of being cool enough. Like, am I cool enough? Are they going to want to talk to me? I have to know like the lingo. I have to know what's in. I downloaded TikTok when it was like a new thing because all my students were on TikTok, and I had to overcome that by realizing like they don't want me to be cool enough or like hip enough. Like they just want me to be authentically myself. They are searching and seeking authenticity, however it comes.
Yeah, like just like when you realize that a student just really, if you show up and you actually care about them and their world and you really put more than like 3 questions worth of effort into that, you can get so far with so many young people. And we know, right, like in our world today, there's really this challenge around loneliness and it's really an epidemic. And so more than ever, it's so awesome when people like you decide, I'm gonna get over that hurdle. I'm gonna jump in and realizing, oh my gosh, I could have done this. Like, I didn't have to like, deal with these barriers to kind of jump in and serve. And so, what's the role of compassion for you in your personal like motivation to serve students well?
Well, I think like it's a both and question. Before, when I was a volunteer, it was I wanted to be an adult that I wish I had when I was a student. At that age, you're trying to be understood. You're trying to figure out what you want to do, who you are, where do you fit in the world, and having someone outside of your family be able to like talk to you and shepherd and like steer you in that direction is so helpful. And so I just wanted to be that adult for them. And then when it became like a professional vocational thing that, I went to become a youth pastor. It's really just, I see Jesus in them, and serving students isn't convenient, like at all. Like, you have students texting you at 8 in the morning or even 8 p.m. And I'm consistently telling my leaders, please don't text students after 8:30. Like, just don't do it. And they're like, are you coming to my game? Are you doing this? And it's like, and then they ask, what is your job? And I'm like, you are my job. And they don't get it. And you have to put your emotions aside if they hurt your feelings, if they don't show up in the way that you would want them to show up, if they don't respond with gratitude in the way that you expect gratitude to be shown. But they are going through so many things, and being compassionate and just showing up and listening is all they want. And they are so vulnerable. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
No, that's really, I love, like, hearing you talk about even how you pursue students relationally and how you show up for them, right? And as you do, it's this weird thing, right? Like, you're giving your time, your energy, your focus, sometimes like in ways that, young people are like, why are you here? Right? Just because it's so like abnormal to what they expect from the world. And yet, as you do, your compassion grows and grows and grows.
Yes.
And so it's kind of this counterintuitive thing, like, well, I'm stepping out, I'm showing up in a space that's uncomfortable, unfamiliar for me. And yet then, like, your compassion grows as a result of that. And so that's really cool. How have you seen the connection, maybe for you, how does serving get connected with becoming more selfless or less self-focused? Have you seen that connection play out for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When you are showing up, when it's inconvenient, if you've had a long day and you've already told a student, hey, I'm gonna be at your game. Hey, I'm going to, like, let's meet for coffee. If you flake out on them, that's kind of like a mark against you. And showing up for the relationship is showing like them, like, hey, I'm gonna show up for you and I'm gonna be there no matter what I have going on. They care about what's going on in their lives, in your life, but it's our role to care more about their lives. So I can't say, oh, I've had a bad day at work. Like, I just can't show up. And it makes you think about the things that they're going through more so than what you're going through. And in that you are experiencing Jesus. When I say I see Jesus in these students, in their curiosity, in their just zeal for life, and just how they love our leaders, not just myself, how they love our leaders, you want to keep showing up. And when we are asking leaders for their time of Sunday morning and midweek, all of our leaders are being so selfless, and that's just such a wonderful thing too. They have jobs and kids, and they're saying, hey, I can give 3 hours a week to students, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and I love that like all of us have a different call, right? A different amount of capacity and what we can bring to the table, but we all have something to share. And then when we do, it's so affirming of the way Jesus. So we're stoked that you're as part of our team. You're doing such an amazing job of modeling the way of Jesus, and students, all of us really, we need to see the way of Jesus lived out before us if we're gonna really be able to take the pages in our Bible and figure out, how do I live it out in real life? You're doing such a great job modeling that to young people and to your leaders. And so, we're just thrilled. Hopefully, this is encouraging for all of us here, and to think about what's my role, what's my way to make a contribution. But thank you for modeling that so well here at Rainier View.
Thank you, Jeff.
Now, your call might be to work with kids or students, and if you feel something stirring, please message us. We would love to get you connected with the right leader to take that next step. But maybe your area to serve is going to be something completely different in some other way. But how do we recalibrate our compassion so that we're serving in the year ahead? Well, begin with this one simple question, okay? First of all, does your serving show up on the calendar? Does it show up on your calendar? Just like what we spend our money on shows what we value, and what we budget our money to shows what we value, just how we spend our time reveals what we value, right? If we value being a compassionate person, it's going to show up in how we sacrifice some of our time and energy and focus to meet the needs of others, and it's going to show up on our calendar in some way. And so the question is, if it's not, maybe just sitting with, how is Jesus inviting you to serve someone else in the year ahead? Now, if it is showing up on our calendars, the question is, what is my motive for serving? Because here's the reality. James and John had sacrificed plenty to follow Jesus. They left their jobs with no guarantee of being provided for. They faced difficulty and trials and hard situations. And yet, at that moment we read of in Mark 10, right, their heart of compassion was off track. They needed to recalibrate to get back on track. And so we'll notice this. When our motives are off, our trajectory changes. It doesn't change immediately. But if we don't pay attention to it, over time we begin to drift further and further away, and we can end up serving not out of a place of compassion, but out of other motives, and we're not going to have the heart of Jesus if we do that. And so God wants you to be able to use the passions, the burdens, the gifts, the experiences that he's given you to make an impact, make a difference in the lives of others for God's kingdom, and to point the way to what it looks like to know and follow Jesus. Now, speaking of recalibrating our motives, there are kind of two extremes to avoid. So I'm going to kind of lay those out for you first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about them. But one extreme is kind of here, oh, well, I'm just going to serve in a different season. When I have more margin, then I'm going to serve. Now, the other extreme is this kind of extreme of being a serial server, right? I just add more and more opportunities, and I'm going to do more and more things, okay? And so let me start with this one first. If we're more on this end, the problem is as we add more and more and more, it can drain out our heart of compassion because we're pouring out, we're giving out so much, and we're not refilling our lives and kind of like having this flow out of a healthy, normal place. And so we don't want to, again, do more. We want to do the right things and the things that God is calling just us to do. So we don't want to be a serial server. But we also don't want to be somebody who's like, there's going to be a magical time where I will have the margin to serve. Because here's the reality. Some seasons of life do offer more freedom to serve. You have more time, more opportunities, more availability to serve. But regardless of what season of life you're in, we always need to be experiencing compassionate community with others, and we always need to seek to give up some of our time, our energy, and our resources to seek the good of others. And so your step in this season right now, at the beginning of a new year, to recalibrate your compassion might just simply be this. Know your season. Know your season, right? Again, as I said, some seasons are going to have more or less time in them. But sometimes this can be the trap we fall into. Oh, like, yeah, we've got young kids right now. When they're older, we're going to serve. Oh, my kids are getting older now, but they're doing sports, and we're just really busy with that. Oh, we're in the teenage years, and we're just trying to figure this out. Oh, well, now that the kids are out of the house, we're just focusing on having time for us, okay? The call of the gospel is not, hey, start serving me when you're 66. Okay? That's not the call of the gospel. Jesus calls us to follow him now wherever we are at. And to recalibrate in the year ahead, that includes serving. Now, the season you're in, how you serve, it's going to look very, very different. Like if you've got a 1-year-old at home, your availability is going to look different than if you're an empty nester, right? But you can see how easy it is to justify not serving at any stage of life. Now, parents, I want you to hear me clearly. If you want your kids to grow up and take hold of a lifelong faith, 90% of that is going to be what they see you do, and 10% of it is going to be what they hear from you. Now, I made up that stat, but I think it holds up. That our kids, what they pick up when it comes to faith is more caught than taught. Yes, we need to teach the right things, but if we're not living it out, if we're not being that living example, doing it for the right motives, our kids are not going to pick up on that. They're not going to live that out for themselves beyond our houses. And so, in this season, what do you have to offer? Don't wait for a perfect season with more availability and more of this or that or the other thing. Look for what you can do right now. Whether it's once a week, whether it's once a month, show up with a heart of compassion to impact the life of somebody else. Whether that's a highly relational thing, whether that's more a behind-the-scenes thing, find your way to do this. Because here's the deal, compassion for others is what's going to fuel us past our self-centeredness to take hold of a selflessness and to really be on another level. Now, some of our obstacles, they're legit obstacles. They're legit things barriers that we have to overcome to really step into serving in the year ahead. And so that's why we need to have this vision fueling up on Jesus and how he served us. Because there's a lot of emotional drivers for serving, but the one that is universal to all of us should be the way that Jesus lived and why he did what he did. That should motivate us. Look with me once more, Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so I've refueled on that again and again and again in my own life. That Jesus was born into a straw poverty, that he lived among us in a dusty, dirty, difficult world. He was judged, he was mistreated, he was ultimately unfairly executed, but then resurrected 3 days later. And so if the God of the universe is willing to extend such compassion to us and being with us, how can that not motivate us to live similarly and treat others in the way that Jesus has treated us? Now, as an aside, sometimes Christians will kind of pose this question like, well, like, I'm really about serving outside the walls of the church, or like, I just want to build up the church. And they kind of be pitted against each other, like one is better or one's more important than the other. Here's the reality. It's not an either or. It is definitely a both and. But what I know from just practical observation and what the Bible tells us is that a weak church leads to less good in the world. Let me say it again. A weak church leads to less good in the world, less impact in the world. When the church functions well, it's like a healthy fueling station that fuels all sorts of good in the world. And you can look at this historically, right? Hospitals, universities, rescue missions, crisis centers, all sorts of good things in the world have their roots in the Christian faith. People who are seeking to follow Jesus, and that good bubbles up from within the church and it spills out into the world around us. This is when the church is at its best. And so we're called to be the light of the world, as Jesus says in Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And so when we come together, let's be a compassionate community that's like a refueling station that sends good out into the world for the sake of God's kingdom. And so if you're joining us live for our online service, you might be thinking, okay, I want to get involved. I'm not sure how. Maybe you have the ability to show up once a month and begin serving in some way. And if that's the case for you, message us. We'd love to talk with you. Maybe you're saying, I don't have the ability to be in person. I don't know what serving looks like. You have opportunities to serve in our online service. You have opportunity to help facilitate online groups and online community happening. And so wherever you are at, whatever your availability is, if you need to step into serving in this new year, reach out, message us. We would love to help you find a place to build this compassionate community wherever we show up in groups as Rainier View. You can be part of building that community in the year ahead. And so let's be people marked by compassion as we do that. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back here next week as we continue our series, Recalibrate.